Matthew, this is something I wanted to do. It's time for us to begin. It's time for us to begin. Jacob, would you mind leading us in a prayer before we get started?
Yes. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for the day you blessed us with. Thank you for allowing us all to come here together and hear a message from your word, Lord. And may the message that Tom delivered us this morning, may we take it to heart and apply it to our everyday lives. Keep us safe for the rest of the day and be with all those who are sick and help them get well as you will, Lord. And do those tending to them and guide their hands that are making all the prayer in your Son's holy name. Amen.
Okay, we're continuing in Galatians chapter 6. Today we're going to be talking about reaping what we sow. This context, if you in Galatians chapter 6, let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he also will reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. I wanted the whole context there. Really, we want to focus on the be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever we sow, we're going to reap. People like quoting this. And like a lot of biblical quotes, it's frequently not offered in the context that the author put it in. And that's what I want to pursue as we go through this. Sowing to the flesh sees its reward in the flesh. Sowing to the world, sowing to this life. Sowing to the Spirit, then benefits the Spirit. Let's look at Matthew chapter 13. This is the parable of the sower. Now, I'm probably in safe company in here for the most part, but it's rapidly going away. So many of the New Testament and Old Testament, but so much of what is taught is via parables. And people understood agriculturally based parables. It just was, it was their life. Jesus put these parables in terms of the lives that they led every day. And when the bulk of our country was primarily an agrarian society, preachers didn't have to wonder about, are people getting the example? Does it make sense to them? And I didn't think about this all that much until I started dealing with teenagers the last 4 or 5 years. Well, and in fairness to them, they weren't doing or saying anything bad. They're just clearly in time removed from when I was their age. And society has, if you view society as the ocean front with tides and waves, the tides come in and out of bunch since I was their age. And just in conversation, especially talking about literature or things like that, what I saw was that anything that was an agricultural analogy was lost on almost the entire audience. I had to go back and explain it in detail. Here's what is meant by that. Because we're less and less an agrarian society. As we, you deal with people in larger metropolitan areas, it's even less and less that. I would hope that for the bulk of us in here, we don't have to go to the detail of here is sowing, planting seeds, or as I've done in my backyard with grass seed. But Jesus gives us this parable, the language of their day. A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came down and devoured them. When he says the wayside, what's he talking about there?
Edges of the field.
Edges of the field. Okay? We might call it, a ditch or whatever. It's right up against the side of the field. If you've done that kind of work, that's very straightforward. If you've spread grass seed in your yard but not wanted to get it in the planters or the garden, you got to do something to make that barrier, right? So some fell on the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places where they did not have much earth. They immediately sprang up because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. Back to the grass seed. One of the things I did this summer before I put out grass seed, because I wasn't going to, I'm not extraordinarily cheap, but some things they just want to. I didn't want to buy turkey. I didn't want to spend the money on something. Just maybe I should. I don't know. But I did go rent an aerator, like you see on a golf course or something like that. Okay, and I use the aerator to break up the area that I was going to seed. Seeded it. I typically use the word broadcast, and Dana shakes her head at me. She says nobody uses the word broadcast. Farmers do, but whatever. Broadcast the seed. Came back with a grass rake, smoothed everything out, and then watered it. Because, one, I didn't want to just leave the seed on top of hard dirt, because what does Jesus say would happen?
Birds.
Yeah. I've got a bird feeder in my backyard. I've already invited them into the neighborhood. So, more seed on the top of hard ground. However, cardinals whistle to their buddies and say, "Yo, over here. The buffet is open." That's what would happen. Some fell on stony places. So that's why I was breaking up a lot of this. Because some of that seed would have sprouted, right? And the roots would have been about like that, and it would already be dead. Some fell among thorns. So please give me the benefit of a little bit of a doubt here. I did not broadcast my grass seed in the bushes and the shrubs and the redwood trees. Nope. Because they would have never had an opportunity. But others fell on good ground and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, 60, 30. Okay. Remember, our theme is reaping what we sow. Where does Jesus tell us the benefit comes from? Where is the sowing benefit found in this parable? On the good ground. Now, we all know, and all of us have heard multiple times and can probably preach from memory the sermon about, watching the sower, he's throwing the seed out here, don't throw it in the ditches, all that stuff. What I want to do since we're talking about reaping what we sow, what I want to do is to challenge ourselves with which one of those grounds are we? We get to choose. Paul said in Galatians that we're going to keep going back to, if we want to reap spiritually, we have to sow what? Spiritually. If we're content with reaping earthly wages, then by all means, let's focus on that. Good for you. But you're going to be rewarded in that way. So we get to decide. That's the great part of when you look at the parable through this lens. Do I want my heart to be prepared ground? Or do I want my heart to be rocky, sunburnt, and shallow? Or do I want it to be prepped and ready to receive the information? There's a lot that goes into that. A lot of simple lessons, a lot of hard ones. But we have to start at that point. And we have to decide which one of those we're going to be. Sometimes we have to choose. Sometimes we have to choose between bitterness or kindness to keep that ground where it's supposed to be. Sometimes we have to choose between a relationship or a principle. What kind of soul do we want? It just becomes a question we have to continually ask ourselves. What kind of soil am I prepping today? Did I walk in that door this morning hard, rocky, and beaten down to where nothing will grow? Or the birds will pick the seed up off the ground? Or did I walk through those doors this morning with a heart that has been aerated, turned over, seeded, smoothed out, and well watered? You get to choose. The person who was represented here by some by the wayside. Again, we're going to keep turning this inward. Do we hear messages that we don't understand them? I have before. When you hear something and you don't understand it, I say this from a person who's now worked in schools with young people for the past several years. What do we want them to do if the teacher says something that they don't understand? Ask questions. I'm not going deep theology here, folks. We're not talking Greek or Hebrew root words. If we don't know something, we ask questions. That's how we learn. There's no fault in that. Because understanding is critical. Are we being... is the seed for us being sown on stony places? And what he says is, this is the person that hears with joy, but has no root within themselves. I wouldn't say it's always easy, but it's not necessarily difficult to sit in here. Clark's going to speak this morning. I have every bit of confidence that it's going to be a well-prepared and effective message. So it's not hard to sit in here and say, yeah, I see that, I hear it. You go to the back door there, you shake Clark's hand and you say, here's what, I got it, good job. As long as that lesson goes with us out the door and home and to work or whatever this week, right? It's got to take root. Some among the thorns, people that hear this, but the word is choked out. Please understand, let's look at this. This was written about 2,000 years ago. Okay? Give or take a handful of years. Roughly 2,000. What was the level of technology in that day? You didn't have running water. Didn't have electricity. Didn't have printing presses. Didn't have radios. Didn't have televisions. Didn't have, right? But we can just keep the list going and going. My point being that what you heard in conversations when you weren't working, and I'm talking hard physical toil and labor, right, for most people at this time, so that you can live to see the next day. How much information you think they were bombarded with on a daily basis compared to today? Compared to today. We live in a flood, a tidal wave of information. The amount of data we are subjected to on any given day can be mind-numbing. I believe, and I think I could defend this well in a debate with just about any opponent, that it's harder today than at any point in the history of our species to stay focused on a message and it not be drowned out by the messaging of society. It's enormously difficult. My point being only that in order for us to be the good ground, in order for my heart to be fertile ground, turned over, prepped, ready for the seed, I have to, probably in today's society, be aware of that third bullet more than any of the others. And we have to be careful where our information comes from. Is there such a thing out there right now as a totally objective, nonpartisan news source? You have to kind of work your way, understanding where things are coming from. And that's not going on a crusade for or against any of it. I'm just saying a rational adult that's trying to make sense of his or her world around them needs to understand that there's always an agenda. And so you work with that. But that makes it hard. That makes it incredibly hard in our society today. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, okay, or in Galatians. Let's turn to Romans chapter 5. I want to read this text. I'm sorry, I did this wrong on my slide, but that's okay. Let's go to Romans. Thank you very much. Chapter 5, towards the end. Because for the most part, the people who divided the books and verses, or the chapters and verses in our Bible did an admirable job. Sometimes the context bleeds across. Starting with chapter 5, verse 20. Moreover, the law entered that offense may abound. But where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. So that as sin reigned in death, even so grace might reign through righteousness to eternal life through Jesus Christ. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. How shall we who died to sin live any longer in it? Or do you not know that as many of us as were baptized... Okay, let me stop. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. What has this got to do? Paul is making an argument in Romans with people who wanted to be profligate and buy their lifestyle choices off by claiming grace. Now tell me here in a second if you can't see this at work in some of our society today. I don't believe a bit of what I'm about to tell you. I'm just setting the stage here. I'm getting ready to advocate something for you that I don't believe and you're going to see through. But lest we be confused. Okay? So here's the deal. Okay, Charles, we're covered by grace. Jesus was God's Son incarnate. Therefore, Jesus shares the qualities of God, of omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence. He was, is, and will always be. So everything about him was infinite. So if his grace covers me, then there is no limit to that grace and I will automatically be forgiven anything I do. Because it's not predicated on me. Grace is not based on my personal virtue or need. It's based on him. And if he's infinite, what's the state of his grace? There you go. So, when I sin, I'm not making his grace less. I'm proving the value of his grace and showing that his grace can abound as far as it needs to go. So the further I continue to sin, the greater I'm demonstrating the grace in my life. So these life decisions that I'm making to pursue this thing, to pursue this thing, to practice this in front of people, it's not that I'm bad. I'm showing people the grace of God step by step. And if God's grace follows and covers me in all of these things, how much joy should you find in grace in your life? See how easy that was? And it took me about 10 seconds to come up with that lesson. Okay? Paul says, no, that's a lie. That is a lie. Some of your Bibles will say, God forbid. But people who preach that lesson want you to believe that they understand a doctrinal level of truth deeper than you, that they are clever. The English have a saying. The people who think they are more clever than the rules, they would say they were too clever by half. People who are too clever by half end up being on the outside of things because they thought they could play fast and loose with the rules when they never could. Sowing to the flesh in the Galatians context is not necessarily or intrinsically evil within the context. What he's saying is, if your goals, objectives, loves, and treasures are physical things in this life, which may include inappropriate behaviors on our part, if you devote your time and energy and attention in your life to those things, you may in fact have a measure of success in those things. But not one of them are going to go with you into the next life. That you can be rewarded physically in a physical life. Every one of you have known ungodly people who gained material success. Show of hands, how many people did their money and stuff get buried with them? Or did other people take it and run? Right? They were rewarded in the flesh because they sowed to the flesh. I'm not saying making a living is evil. That's not it at all. It's part of how we have to live. The people that are wholly focused on this life can expect to reap rewards associated with this life. When Steve Jobs passed away, body racked by cancer, he was incredibly wealthy, in the billions of dollars. I don't know. And he finally realized he could almost quote Ecclesiastes word for word. It's all vanity. It didn't amount to anything. But he reaped enormously. And I'm not saying that anything that Mr. Jobs did business-wise was illegal, wrong, unethical. He built a huge business, did great for himself. But all of those proceeds stayed in this life. They didn't go with him to the next one. We're expected to sow for the next life. Now, do we have to make a living? Yes. We've talked the last few weeks about bearing our own burdens, helping our brethren bear their burdens. That's all part of it. We have to get engaged, address our needs. When I talked to the Navy recruiter, he said, "Tom, what are you interested in?" I said, "I'm interested in eating every day and having a roof over my head." He said, "So what I want to do," he says, "I want to know what you have that 10 years from now will make me a decent career path and give me an opportunity for a career and a skill set that's marketable." I didn't go in there saying, "Here's my hopes and dreams." I said, "I got to make a living. I got to keep one of these days I got to keep a roof over my head. Hopefully, maybe somebody who can tolerate me enough to share the same." So now I get that part. But we also, in the midst of that, have to have a life that's defined by getting ready for the next life. That is not an endorsement of karma. Karma is a direct metaphysical approach that we're going to have a series of reincarnations, and good things or bad things you do in this life, if you don't get rewarded or smacked back by those things in this life, it'll happen in the next life. And if a horrible thing happens to me in this life, probably in the previous life or two, I did something to deserve it. That's karma. That is not at all what he is talking about here. Not even close. He's talking about while we walk this earth, while we have to live this life, while we have to provide for ourselves, for our families, only the most extreme buffoon would stand up here and tell you that we all should just focus on spiritual things. None of us will have to work. Let's just sit out there in the grass and somebody will heap food upon us at the end of every day. No, the days of manna stopped, okay, about 3,000 years ago. I don't think it's restarting anytime soon. So we have to do those things. But we have to be focused primarily on sowing for the next life.
And the manna they even had to go get it.
Yeah, they still have to go prepare it, right? So we still have to do that. Because the next life matters. For I know that my Redeemer lives, Job said. Give me a second. To me, this is one of the most profound things in the entire Bible. I know that my Redeemer lives. He wrote that at least 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. Probably more. No less than 1,000. And he shall stand at last on the earth. After my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. How does that even begin to make sense if there is not a resurrection? I'm no scholar with regard to the Sadducees and the Pharisees. I know fundamentally kind of the big differences, but I don't know how the Sadducees took this passage from Job and ignored it to say that there was no resurrection. That even then, Job knew that we have a Redeemer that lives, that we're going to face that Redeemer in a resurrected form. And those words, that in my flesh I shall see God. Now that can be something to be looked forward to or dreaded. The great thing is we get to decide. Life's full of choices. Dana and I have moved around enough to, where do we live? What house? Whatever. Lots of choices. But we have to make this choice. Remember back to every one of us is going to bear our own burden. That's the burden we're going to bear. What's our choice? What did we do with this life that we were given? That we have to help each other bear each other's burdens, because there's going to be days that we all need help and we need something to keep our knees from buckling under the weight of life. But there will come a day, and we still, if you're not bought into this part of the New Testament, then you need to study. That he will return, this Redeemer. And that in our flesh we will see God. Not necessarily this like we look right now. But there will be a body to stand before him. And even Job knew that. Is unfolding as it should. Whatever.
Well, Jesus said, rains on the just and the unjust.
That's right.
That's a good verse for us to all embrace. Otherwise, you can definitely go through life looking around and thinking you're scratching your head. How is God let this happen? But he's told us it's going to happen.
Which puts the prosperity gospel message to life. Because you cannot measure spiritualness by a person's income statement. There are wonderful people. There are wonderful, very wealthy people. There are wonderful people of extraordinarily humble means. And the opposite is true, so we can't judge it that way.
We think of wants, not needs. That's what God said he'll provide our needs, not our wants.
But this we have to know. And that each one of us has to decide, where are we sowing to? Because whatever we plant is going to grow up, right? Look at me like I'm giving advice. The best thing I grow is grass and weeds and the cracks in the sidewalk. That's about where I do my best work. Any questions, comments? Okay, thank you.